interesting. Interest rates mean less cash flow, mean investors don't like what they're in, means moving money around, which means selling tenant-occupied properties.
Yeah.
This is something we're seeing like quite a bit, and it's picked up, I'd say, in the last like 6 months as, rates have now been higher for 18 months. There was 2 more rate hikes in the summer this year. The last 2 have been holds, but interest rates are not pretty, and mortgage amounts have gone up significantly in the last year and a half, and cash flow on a lot of rental properties isn't making sense. So we are seeing a lot of tenant-occupied properties come up for sale. And there are a lot of things to consider. We've done podcasts on this in the past, but I think a really good time to refresh because we are, personally, we've had a couple investors unload properties in the last month or 2, and it's definitely a growing trend.
But it's a touchy topic.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's behind every tenanted property sale is a family that's likely getting displaced.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 80% chance they're going. It's also alternatively a landlord that has a little bit of relief. A lot of the times these are individuals that aren't thrilled about being a landlord, but they just had a property that they paid pennies on the dollar for, and it's gained a lot of value over the time. And they just haven't had to think about it until maybe they decided to get some money out of their property, lock in a variable rate mortgage a couple of years ago, and now their payments are through the roof.
Yeah.
But I will say that tenanted properties, the sale of tenanted properties has been a standout trend that is unique to now. And it's 2 big reasons. One, rents have gone up a lot. So a lot of these properties are well under market rents. And 2, the cost of keeping these properties has gone up. So the cash flow of a lot of landlords has dwindled.
Mm-hmm.
There are exceptions. There's the old Italian guy in North Burnaby that has no mortgage, that is just, still raking it in. But a lot of people do stretch themselves when they're buying an investment property, especially if you bought it in the last 10 years. And aside from strata fees and property taxes, mortgage payments are up. And it's hard to be a landlord. It's hard to justify all the things you have to do as a landlord when you're losing money every month.
Yeah.
You want some reward. And it's for myself, I've been a landlord many times, and it doesn't feel good right now. It only feels good when the market's climbing. It feels better when, you have, you buy your first 1-bedroom rental, turnkey, you get a tenant in there. Those opening moments feel good because you accomplish something. And then if you experience a market where there's no price gain for 5 years, you're like, why am I doing this? And then if your cost goes up in a significant time because rates are through the roof, it's even further even further question your motives. Being a landlord is a good investment over a long haul. But right now, there's a lot of people that, tenants have significantly gained power over the last decade. They, and rightfully so, there's, a lot of wrongful evictions in the past and people taking advantage of that. But right now you're just incentivizing all the factors of the world right now, below market rents, high cost of interest. Mm-hmm. It creates incentives for landlords to liquidate because a lot of these products the prices are holding, and I'm looking, when you look at what do we typically recommend to an investor that's, a first-time investor when they're buying an investment property in Vancouver. Often it's a 1-bedroom close to a SkyTrain, built after, call it 2000s, with rain screen technology and to reduce your risk and have higher chances of rentals allowed. But now it's everywhere rentals allowed. But those products are performing relatively well right now. Mm-hmm. A 1-bedroom in New Westminster today is selling for around the same price it was last spring, which is around the same, it hasn't come off peak pricing much, within 5% of peak. So when your costs have gone through the roof and your prices are holding within 5% of peak pricing, in a lot of cases, you could continue being a landlord and continue losing money, or you could sell the property, get your capital gain payment out of the way, and either take a break from being a landlord or reinvest in another property that's better suited to rent and get market rents. And right now it's people are selling tenant properties, which also contributes to higher rents because it's displacing more people.
Mm-hmm. It's a strange time. And like, even as an investor, as a landlord, personally, I'm considering unloading something.
Yeah.
Because the numbers are so far off right now. It's okay to lose $500 a month in an environment where we think it's going to be better in 2, 3, 4 years from now. But is it okay for people to be losing $1,500 a month, $2,000 a month? And a lot of people that are in variable mortgage rates or have done a refi in the last couple of years or something like that are in these situations where rent is not covering a significant portion of your monthly costs. And, you know, depending on the income of that person, you can only support that for so long. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of tenanted properties come up for sale.
I can't speak for, I mean, the detached rented home can be a rundown home. And the rundown home on, you know, with a few negative features may not perform great right now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so there are exceptions to certain property types might need a little market momentum behind them to perform well. So if you're an owner of, a rental property that doesn't look so pretty, don't expect, those ones aren't necessarily performing well. But the 1-bedroom condo, the turnkey, small, simple rental, for New West, for example, like not long ago, a 1-bedroom in downtown, like call it the Carnarvon buildings on Plaza 88, Azure. Those not long ago were renting for $1,600-1,700 a month. And now, you know, if you rented one 5 years ago, that's probably your rate. And now they're closer to 24.
Mm-hmm.
And the values are near peak pricing. They're some areas are off upwards of 5 to 10%, maybe land value or the luxury home in the dead quiet market or the house that's run down on the busy street. Those ones might be impacted 10% plus.
Yeah.
But there's examples, I was looking at them before, of multiple condos that have sold in the last 30 days that are selling to prices similar to this spring, similar to last spring. And last spring was 2021 spring, the craziest spring market I've ever experienced. And you're not taking a hit. We sold a duplex in North Burnaby. That type of product is rare, you know, a full duplex. It's the, I'm going to stereotype again, it's the dream investment for that old Italian guy in North Burnaby. But there was a lot of, I mean, openly that it got a lot of interest. There was a lot of demand for it. Surprising amount of demand. It was one of the busiest listings we had when it was on. Those tenants are paying well under market rent. That landlord, I know they put their best effort to find a buyer that's going to keep them. I don't know what the outcome will be, but it's going to be on that buyer to decide. But I mean, that was a unique product, and right now it's, I mean, it performed well. It sold near peak pricing, and that landlord was tired of being a landlord.
Mm-hmm. 30 years. Yeah. I think we should probably touch on like the process a little bit, things to consider. You know, when selling tenanted properties is different. You know, you have to consider the emotion of the tenants. You know, you're ultimately in a lot of cases, you're selling a property that the occupant does not want to move. The occupant has no incentive to fix it up. The occupant has no incentive to really make your job easy. Other than just the fact that most humans are kind and they will accommodate. But we, as a realtor, be mindful that it is a very delicate sale, that you are probably displacing a family, that they're probably going to be usually you're surprising them in a lot of cases because you're having a conversation with the property owner and then they don't want to present it until they know for sure. And then when they get the value and they have to show you the property, that's when the tenant finds out. And then the tenant soon looks up other rental options at some point and realizes they're paying way less than what they'll have to get. And that's just a tough environment to sell in. Mm-hmm. And so things that we do to kind of help mitigate that is just prep the tenant. Say, look, we want, be aware of your rights, recognize that we're working for the property owner. We need to show the property. We'll show it when is convenient for you, make it as convenient as possible for the tenant. Give them as much notice as possible when you're given notice. If you know that the buyer is going to move into the property
and you're just waiting on that notice to show up, maybe prep them to say, hey, start looking for some places, but don't give a tenant false hopes that they're going to stay. Don't, treat them delicately, knowing that they're going to go through a lot. And, on the alternative side, recognize there's a landlord in that equation. That is your customer, it is your client, and you're creating a lot of relief for that person to get out of being a landlord. But Denny, what are you seeing in terms of opportunities for sellers or buyers right now?
Let me touch quickly on tenancies. So sure. I think it's important to just note that, depending on what type of tenancy agreement is in place, the sale process will be different, or the outcome may be very different. I had a buyer buy a tenanted property. They're looking to purchase an investment property 2 months ago that had a 1-year lease in place. So that immediately cut out 80-90% of the buyer pool. And so we got a pretty good deal on something like that. So if you are an investor, typically in the past, we talked about avoiding tenanted properties because the rent may be low. But it's an interesting time in that this was a distressed seller. Their monthly payments had gone up pretty significantly. They had just signed a 1-year lease 2 months previous. So there's a lot of time left on that. And those types of deals are happening more now than previous years. Very rarely would a landlord sign a 1-year lease and then sell the property a month later. But that type of stuff is happening right now because of interest rates. So it's actually kind of interesting as an investor type person to look at tenanted properties and find out what the tenancy agreements are like. As a landlord selling, remember that you cannot cancel a lease contract without the tenant's consent, without the tenant's written consent. And obviously for them, there's very little incentive unless there is some sort of financial incentive to cancel a tenancy. So just be aware of that. Month-to-month tenants, you need to give them 2 full months notice, and you can't do that before you sell. You can't kick them out to sell it vacant. You need the buyer to give you a document called a notice for vacant tenancy to provide actual notice, the 2 months notice to the tenants to have them vacate. And in times like this, when rents have skyrocketed in the last 1 or 2 months or 1 or 2 years, be aware that the relationship and how you handle those conversations with the tenant can be the difference between a very, very sour exit and a very cordial exit. We've also had to deal with that in the last few months of just a tenant not wanting to leave. They felt like they were screwed a little bit. They didn't, whatever the communication behind the scenes was, but find that the more communication, the earlier in the process, relieves a little bit of that shock factor, gives them more time to look for, other housing, and can potentially make that whole process a little bit smoother. As a realtor, like Jamie mentioned, it's really important to be as accommodating as possible for the tenant schedules. You don't know what is going on in their life. They may have children that have activities at random times of day. And if you just say, hey, we're doing showings on Thursday from 5 to 6, that may literally be the worst time of the week for them. So just, again, going into the listing, usually a week or two in advance, as you're taking, as you're booking photos, plan those showing times well in advance as a realtor with these tenants, and just trying to accommodate it as best as you can.
There's a lot there. I think I want to touch on a few of those points there, Denny. The 1-year lease thing, if you just signed a 1-year lease with a new tenant, and we do run into this more often than we'd like to. Historically, that was don't sell. You have 10 months left. The buyer's going to want to move in. Don't sell. Right now, that might not be an option. You might have to sell. You might have just signed a lease. I think it's crucial that you get to an agreement with your tenant if you're going to get serious about selling. Get that mutual agreement to end tenancy. Or at least the terms lined up. There is a document where you can mutually agree to end the tenancy. And usually, if you have committed to a 1-year rent and they're 2 months into it, they're not going to want to voluntarily move out in 3 or 4 months into that if they plan to be there for a while. And they don't have to move out. The way that their rights are right now is they can just stay there until the homeowner's moving in, or they break a rule, say they damage the property or don't pay rent. But the importance is to come up with the tenancy agreement outweighs the sales contract. It is more powerful. You cannot deviate from it. The tenant can be there for a year if you signed off on them being there for a year. And most buyers right now are looking to move into the property. So if you're listing a property, odds are the buyer wants to move in. Very few investors buying right now. There could be investor product, but very few are buying. And the important thing is that if you want a chance of selling, you need to outline what the options are when that buyer can close with vacant possession. And if you haven't had a chat with the tenant about what's it going to take to break this tenancy agreement and get you out earlier, then you're going to be surprised when offer time comes. It's better to have that information before you get the offer than after. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes to get that tenant to mutually agree to end it earlier, you're going to have to incentivize them. Maybe give them 3 months rent, maybe give them a sum of money to help their moving expenses, whatever it is. Incentivize them to sign it, because if you have 10 months left on your term, you're really limiting the buyer pool. Month to month, you're great. You just need 2 full months notice. But if you get an offer with subjects removed on November 1st, that 2 months doesn't start until December 1st. So a November 1st firm contract where the buyer provides that eviction notice. Mm-hmm. Keep in mind, the buyer is putting the liability on them, saying, the tenant must must leave the property because I'm moving into it. And if that buyer does not move into the property and re-rents it to someone else, they could be in trouble. And the fine could be 12 months of rent. And not necessarily the rent that the tenant was paying at your place too. It could be 12 months of market rent of where they moved to. So you could be if the buyer wrongfully evicts a tenant, or anyone wrongfully evicts a tenant, you can be on the hook for a $20,000, $30,000 fine, depending on how much a year's rent is at market rents that person moved into. And that is something that is tenants are more aware of. I would say one growing trend is tenants are more aware of their rights. They're more aware of that they get 2 full months notice, 1 free month rent. They're more aware of if they got evicted, they're more likely to watch that property and see if it gets re-rented, because they're aware of the damages they can get if that happens. And then the tenancy board is more likely to vote in their favor if they see an opportunity to. So mutual agreements to end tenancies if you're breaking a term is key. Even if it's month to month and it's an investor buyer that wants to re-rent it, you need to do a mutual agreement, and don't try to deviate from the terms of a tenancy agreement. What would be a tenant's incentive to sign it? You really, in most cases, they're going to be paying more rent. They're going to have moving costs. It's an inconvenience. So even if you had to incentivize them with 3 months rent or $10,000, it's in some cases, it is very justifiable. Anything to add to that, Denny?
I don't think so. I think just the point of this was we're seeing more tenant occupied properties come up for sale right now. We are dealing with a lot of landlords who are wanting to get out of real estate investments because of rates. And so just be prepared that there is a lot of procedure involved with selling a tenant occupied property. So deal with someone who does these all the time.
Also, don't expect the tenant to go to plan.
Yeah.
If a lot of the reason why we stress the importance to maintain the best possible relationship with the tenant, that means be kind and respectful as possible, is so that they're less likely to deviate from what they're supposed to do. And in a lot of cases, it might be you get that offer November 1st, the buyer wants to move in, so they send you a notice to evict. That notice to evict means that they get December and January to live there, January free month rent. So let's close February 2nd, call it. The buyer's going to be out January 31st. If that tenant is giving you red flags that they're not happy, they're not thrilled, they don't have a place to go, plan for a plan B. If you're closing the day after that tenant's supposed to move out or 2 days after that tenant's supposed to move out and they don't move out on time, you're stuck with a mess. So as a realtor, our suggestion is always like you can see the red flags based on usually the condition of the property or the attitude of the tenant.
Yeah.
But if they're getting the red flags, that leaves you to believe that this tenant may not follow the protocol. They may not move out on time, because guess what? If they don't move out on time, odds are not much is going to happen to them. Odds are they're going to be not paying your rent. They're going to be waiting for the bailiff to show up to make them move, and then they'll move out at that time and squat for free for a period of time. But that's case by case. But just recognize that if a buyer is buying something and expecting a move-in date, and the tenant is not happy, maybe warn that buyer to say, hey, here's a plan A completion date, but if we find out on February 1st that the tenant's not moved out, you should prepare for a plan B completion date. And any buyer buying a tenant property should be aware that it is outside of the seller's control. Everyone's at the mercy of the tenant and needs to be flexible when buying a tenant property.
As realtors involved in these transactions who are writing dates into contracts, be aware and advise clients that giving possession, let's use Jamie's example of tenants are out January 31st. Most often, buyers' agents are writing contracts that say completion January 31st, possession February 1st. And this is not realistic. Remember that, like, even in the best of situations where the tenants are awesome people and they find a new place and they're moving out, there's going to be stuff left behind. You're likely asking for the property to be professionally cleaned. 2 hours on, the Tuesday morning, February 1st, from 8 to 11 at possession is not enough time to take care of all these junk removal items and cleaning and, repairing small little fixes and things like that. So I always try to push that possession date like 3 or 4 days after the first of the month. And it also comes with like the opportunity to be accommodating to the tenant. Remember that if they're getting kicked out on January 31st and they find another rental, most rentals start on the first of the month. So what are they going to do on the evening of the 31st? Whereas you can move those possession dates a couple days to be a little bit more accommodating to them, to potentially, help this process and help them move out on time. But let them stay until halfway through the day on February 1st in that example. And give keys to the buyer on the 4th or 5th. So you have the time to do the professional cleaning, junk removal if any, and do little touch-ups if needed.
We've experienced all the stories in the world of tenancy. We've experienced the tenants that don't move out, the appliances getting stripped. I've had to move tenants out. I had to get the truck because they wouldn't. I had a rental in New West, and unfortunately, they had to grow up, and life was not good for them, and it was a mess. It was an absolute mess. And the only way that they were going to leave is if I facilitated them moving by providing a truck and helping them move their stuff out. That was on my oldest son's first birthday. So I remember it distinctly. But at the end of the day, you don't want a worst case scenario. And even Denny's saying that, don't close one day, like February 1st, if the tenants expect to be out January 31st, wait it for February 5th. But recognize if you really want to be Sure, it might make sense to do it 2 weeks after.
Yeah.
Because if you call it 2 weeks after the expected move out date, it gives you plenty of notice to let the notaries and lawyers on either side know that there's going to be an extension, and you can plan accordingly and have less surprises, less rush fees, and you're just more likely to be able to adapt. Denny, when do you think this is going to be a trend that we're going to see in 2024 as well?
100%.
Yeah, this will probably not slow down in the foreseeable future.
I mean, it's worth noting, like the Airbnb thing too, right? Like there's going to be a lot more tenanted style come onto the market. Some of these Airbnb owners may elect to go long-term and just not like it. So I see that being potentially more tenant occupied properties coming up for sale in the next like 12 to 24 months as well.
We'll wait and see.
We will.